Hi everyone, I'm Jo Fry and this is my channel Jojo Fry Rocks, and in this special two-part video I'm going to be doing a deep dive into guitar amps, because even though I've been playing electric guitar for over 30 years now, I've actually only ever owned 3 amps in total over that time. One was my practice amp, which came with my Squier guitar. It was just a little solid state Fender practice amp, probably about 15 watts or something, can't remember. Then I had my Line 6 Spider 210, which you can see in this video. Still really fun and still works, but not really the best kind of amp that's available now, certainly. So last year I upgraded to a Boss Katana 50 watt combo amp, digital modelling amp. So that's it, my entire history of using guitar amps. And I feel like this is something that I really need to look into more and get more knowledge about. And so I decided to ask some of my brilliant friends on Guitar YouTube a couple of key questions, I think.
Excuse me, I'd like to ask you a few questions.
Which is, what's your favourite amp and why? Difficult one, I know, but I got some awesome answers. And what tips or advice would you give someone who was maybe a beginner, buying their first amp, or maybe like me, not that knowledgeable and buying a new amp? What are the kind of things to bear in mind and look for? So I got some brilliant, super interesting and helpful answers from Steve Cassidy, The Lamb, John Oakley, Andy, the Guitar Geek, and Brian from Searching for Tone. And then I decided to quiz my friend Andy Mack from Guitar Stuff Studio, pick his brain for hours on end about everything that I've ever wanted to know about guitar amps. So it was quite a long chat, which is why I've decided to break it up into 2 videos. So I hope you'll enjoy this first part and find it as entertaining and interesting as I did to make. And I'll see you on part 2.
Hey Joe, so my favorite amp currently, actually at the moment, is my Fender Princeton Reverb that I got from Sweetwater. And I've had so many amps over the years, and I feel like that I always kind of like to have just a pedal platform, and the Fender to me always does a great job of it. So something low wattage, because I use it mainly here. I'm not a gigging person.
Hello. So, what's my favourite amp? Good question. I don't think I have a favourite amp, but if I was forced to choose, which I think is the scenario here, isn't it? We're being forced to choose favourite amps. I would probably have to go with the Fender Mustang 3 version 2, which is the 2nd generation of the Fender Mustang amps. I've got one from every generation, so Gen 1, Gen 2, GT and GTX. And for me, that one just sounds the best. I don't know what it is about it. It just sounds better than all the rest. Anywho, what I like about it, it's got a 12-inch speaker. I'm looking at it right now. It's lightweight. It's just about loud enough for small gigs. And if you needed to do bigger gigs, you've got right and left XLR outs, so you can go to front of house or whatever you like. We've got a wee cheeky ground lift in there if you were needing that. It's got an effects loop, which I would never use because I think the built-in effects and amp models are good enough for me. I'm not like super fussy with tone. You've got presets and amp models, and they all sound, I think they sound good. What else have we got going on here? Oh yeah, you can use a 4-button foot switch and the 2-button foot switch combined, which gives you a lot of versatility in your feet. And you can also connect the Fender EXP1 expression pedal, so you can use that for wahs, volumes, whatever you like. Loads of options. So yeah, it's super versatile, and it even sounds good at low volumes at home, which is good. But I don't even gig that amp anymore. These days I'm gigging one of these. I'm using my Line 6 HX Stomp XL for gigging, which again gives me a lot of stuff at my feet. That's what I prefer. #Ampless 2025.
Hello, Joe. Hello, Joe's viewers. I'm Andy, and you might know me on YouTube as the Guitar Geek, if we're watching this on YouTube. Right, my favourite amp is this, the Fender Deluxe Reverb. This I picked up used quite a few years ago now, or it feels like a long time. This, I kind of feel like we're almost partners, me and this amp, because it's my benchmark. Everything I play with, generally on the channel, goes through that at some point in a video or at some point in my personal time, because I know what that amp sounds like. And I think that's a big part to having a favourite amp is, or any piece of gear, or generally things in life, is knowing how it will deliver its sound. I know how it will perform when you change everything else, like the guitar that I'm reviewing, or the pedal, or the cab. Generally speaking, if I make a video, everything goes through that at some point. It's got a great inbuilt reverb. There's a tank in there. It's Fender reverb. The tremolo in there is not my favorite because of the clickiness. It ticks, and I think there's a mod for that, or if you get the hand-wired version, then it doesn't do that. Mine does, which is why I don't tend to use it, but apart from that, that's my sort of ride or die. I do also have another kind of favourite, and that's down here. That is a Boss Katana. They're on Generation 3 now, but if I had to turn up to a show and I didn't know any amp in the world and I didn't want to know if I could rely on tubes, then this would be my second choice.
Hey, Jojo and Jojo fans, thanks for asking me to be in a part of this little amp 101 thing that you're doing. My favourite amp is the only one I've got. I got a Boss Katana Mark II 100 watt. I've had all sorts of amps over the years and things like that, but I'm not in a band or anything as such. But I get called to do various things, and this is like the cheapest way to get the most versatile thing you can. I just had a look on eBay. You can get these for 250 quid used, and they're fantastic. Get the 100 watt one if you're going to get one. The top tip buying an amp, I did this once. I got persuaded by the beautiful tones of an Ashdown 20 watt pure Class A driven valve amplifier. And what happens is you go in the shop and you play into it, oh, it sounds glorious, valvey goodness, etc., etc. And I remember taking it to a jam night, quite a good one, in Swansea, and sticking it next to the drummer, and everyone fires up, and the drummer fires up, and you can't hear the amp. 20 watts pure Class A was not loud enough to overcome the drummer. So top tip, don't embarrass yourself like I did. I had to go home with a tail between my legs. Buy something that's loud enough. But the 100 watt ones of these are great. The other thing is that when you plug it in, I mean, you've got all the software on it. I know some people aren't into fiddling. It's quite accessible from the top. But you've got like this shit as well. The Katana Boss, what do we call it? What I'm saying is for 250 quid, you get a 100 watt amp and the equivalent of like I don't know, it's like a GT100 floor pedal. All the effects you could want to play with. It sounds pretty good, right? Well, you hear the demo. Here's a more distorted one. See what you think. Thanks, Joe.
Okay, welcome back, you beautiful people. Hope you're having a great day, and thanks very much for joining me. Now today, Jojo Fryrox has asked me to talk to you about amps. Where do we start? This is massive, this question. What's the best amp? What's my favourite? What's recommended for you? What should you buy? how can you answer that? You know, I mean, I've had my valve amps, my transistor amps, I've had modelling amps, big and small, all sizes, all shapes, stacks, you know. Now, if you know Paul Richards from My House Studios, he's got a very small one, a very little one. Poor old Mrs. Richards. But anyway, getting back to these amps. Now, I personally have actually just gone to the dark side in the last few months.
If you only knew the power of the dark side.
Because these amps, I'm getting old.
We're all getting so old. Why are you doing this to us?
You know, I can't carry around these bloody great things anymore. So I actually moved on to digital modelers. So I'm going to tell you all about that after this urgent warning message. Okay, I just need to warn you that in case there's a little Scottish bloke called Steve Cassidy turn up on this video, ignore everything he says. Because the man, he wears skirts to weddings. What's that all about? All right, you can't trust a man in a skirt. So yeah, even though he's a lovely bloke and he's a superb YouTuber, ignore everything he says, all right? Who wears skirts, honestly? Okay, so for me, this is the future. The Fender ToneMaster Pro, I think this thing is phenomenal. The simplicity of use, the sounds that you get out of it, and the support they're giving it as well. It's been out for about a year and a bit now, and the amount of updates we've been given for this, which not just bug fixes and improvements in sound quality, but actually extra features, and they're all free, and they just keep making it better and better and better. This thing is phenomenal. The connectivity on it, the screen, the responsiveness of it, the sound, the feel, it's just brilliant. You can Bluetooth audio stream your backing tracks through it. You know, you can connect your tablet, your PC, your Mac, your phone, all wirelessly straight to this with their own apps, and the apps are phenomenal. Okay, it's all drag and drop and it's all on screen, and it feels and looks like a real amp in front of you, and the real pedals. The screen has all the knobs, it just looks real. So you know exactly how to use it because you've already used amps in the past and you've used your pedals in the past. This thing is unbelievable. Now hopefully they're going to bring out a smaller version as well, because this is a beast, which I love, but I also like a smaller one sometimes when I'm just doing a little pottering, you know, if you travel, like a travel one. So that's where this one comes in. Okay, so when you want something a little bit more portable, I reckon the Tone X is where it's at. This thing is phenomenal. It's had some major updates recently. It's got a full editing suite on your Mac or PC. Okay, now it's also got the ability to download any amp that's ever been captured by the Tone X system. Okay, so you can have Dumbles on here for free. You'd have to pay a penny. They're all downloadable, but you can also get paid ones as well if you want some pro ones. But to be fair, many of the actual free ones are phenomenal. They sound just like the real thing. They feel like the real thing. And now you can even put reverbs and delays, distortion pedals, the choruses and so on in the signal chain within the editor. So it's all saved per patch. This is ridiculous for 300 odd quid, you know. And also another one to consider, a real great one, we've just had a massive update for the Nano Cortex. So Nano S2 has just been released in the last couple of weeks. Now that's added all the same facilities as this, but with many, many more options on the actual effects. There's a lot more effects than this. So that's a great option too. So for me, I would get a Nano Cortex or a Tone X pedal if you're on a budget, or if you want to spend some big cash, get the Fender ToneMaster Pro and you'll be sorted for life. I hope that helps. Thanks very much for watching. Back to Jojo Fry.
Morning, Andy. Thanks a lot for agreeing to come on the channel and give me a bit of a overview today about amps. Because...
You didn't give me much choice, but I'm happy to be here.
But I do appreciate it anyway. And yeah, because you're probably the most knowledgeable person that I know really about all of this stuff. It's something that I feel I'm really kind of missing. There's like a big gap in my knowledge about this because I've never really been that into it. When I started out, I just had a practice amp, a Fender practice amp that came with my Squire guitar. And I just used that until I started gigging and playing in bands. And when that happened, I just went out and bought a bigger, louder amp, but it was a digital modelling amp. It was a Line 6. And that was only the second amp that I'd ever had. And I had that until last year when I bought my Katana. So that's my entire history and experience and knowledge with amps. So I really don't know anything about tube amps. I really don't know anything about what different types of amps are available. I broadly know that there's tube amps and digital amps, or solid state.
Solid state.
But I'm not even entirely convinced that I know what that means. So
Okay.
so we're really going to have to do amps 101 here.
I think amps are one of those things that unless I don't know. I suppose a lot of people's amp knowledge is based out of necessity. You know, if you are rehearsing regularly, playing live shows, you know, it kind of depends what you're going for and what kind of sound you want. So I would say, like, if you were like a blues purist, you know, if you're a Stevie Ray Vaughan lover or something like that, then you'd want a good old tube amp, something nice and warm that you can drive. We'll go into that. But these days, especially with like plugins, pedals and everything, if you're just playing at home and you just want something for the sound of your guitar to come out, then it doesn't really make that much difference. I suppose I first started getting interested in amps in my early 20s, and I was obsessed with Andy Summers out of the Police.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Not in a weird way.
Not that there's anything wrong with that. Not that there's anything wrong with it. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Not at all.
As a guitar player.
Yeah, he's a genius. Yeah.
Yeah, he's a genius, and I was like, oh, I want to sound like Andy Summers, and you know, the Roland Jazz Chorus was one of his you know, go-to amps, and I was like, yeah, I need to get one of those, and I only got the small one to start with.
And that's a tube amp, is it?
No, it's solid state.
Solid state, right? Okay, but not digital, because that was back in the
digital amps have only been around as we know them now for maybe 25-30 years, so they're still quite a new thing.
What's kind of solid state as opposed to
right? Okay, well, the original amps, I mean, back in the 60s, you know, when guitar bands started getting big, like guitar amplifiers weren't really that much of a thing. Yeah. You know, the bands used to play through their old radios and stuff, and then guitar companies started coming out with amps that all, you know, both guitarists, the bassist and the singer could all just plug into the same amp and use that. You know, loudness and clarity wasn't really a consideration. And then obviously, you know, the guitar companies got wise to the fact that guitarists wanted their own amps. So, you know, they started making amps specifically for guitarists, and then, you know, ones that concentrate on the lower end frequencies, you know, for bass players and stuff, because bassists were just wrecking guitar amps and stuff. And back in those days, everything was tube driven. Radios, televisions, guitar amps.
Yeah, everything wasn't it? Because that was kind of the main.
That was the technology. And then obviously the solid state stuff was when people started using transistors as opposed to using tubes in the amps.
Okay, I don't think I know what transistors are.
Right, transistors are basically, they were the microchip of the 60s. Yeah, I mean, do you remember, like, people... nearly said something really mean. Like, old people had the really big radios in their front rooms, and like the radio was the centerpiece of the living room, and they were full of tubes and stuff. Yeah. And then once the transistor was invented, then you started getting, you know, the small radios, the transistor radios. Okay, so basically, a transistor is like a silicon carbon chip thing that will do what a tube does.
Okay, so how come, one of the questions that I have really, I suppose, is like, how come, because, you know, most of the time in technology, when like a new technology is invented, everything moves over to that, and we don't use the old one anymore. So like when, if you think about televisions and stuff like that, once we went to like LCD flat screens and everything, you don't have big massive cathode ray TVs anymore.
Tubes.
You don't get, we don't use those. We all got rid of those and we've all moved on. But it kind of seems like, okay, there was this development into solid state using transistors and stuff, but yet tube amps still carried on.
Well, a lot of guitar players, and a lot to this day, still prefer the sound of a tube amp. So the thing is with tubes is like, you've seen them, they're basically like little light bulbs. When you turn the amp on, it's quite satisfying hearing the tubes warm up. I mean, if you turn a tube amp on and you're plugged into it, you've got to wait a good minute or so before you can play through it, because the tubes need to get warm to pass that current around and everything. And the thing is, take the Ibanez pedal, the Tube Screamer.
Yeah.
The whole thing behind a Tube Screamer pedal is that is mimicking the sound of the tubes being turned right up and pushed, which causes the signal to then start breaking up and become distorted. Mm-hmm. So with a tube amp, when you're driving it and heating the tubes right up, you're kind of getting a natural distortion.
Okay, so that...
You are overdriving the tubes. You are driving the tubes harder, which makes you have... And some people just prefer that to... the sound of a distortion pedal. That's why you've got the difference between the overdrive pedal and the distortion pedal.
Okay, I see. So the overdrive is quite literally that.
Mimicking overdriven tubes, whereas a distortion pedal is a straight up distorted signal.
Okay, and I guess the whole reason we have that, or we want that, is because of the original tube amps and the way that they kind of were pushed originally just by the gain in terms of the guitar pickups.
Yeah, we're both huge Beatles fans.
Yeah.
And we know that, Vox started making bigger and bigger and bigger amps for the Beatles because they just could not be heard. Right. Over a stadium full of screaming. Yeah. So, but obviously when they had the smaller amps, they were having to turn them right up. And obviously when you're turning those amps right up, they're going to distort because the tubes are hot. So, and obviously...
But they liked, the sort of musicians at that time sort of grew to like that sound, I guess, and actually incorporate it in their music.
Yeah, because then you started getting pedals like the fuzz bender and the fuzz face and stuff like that, to mimic an overdriven sound.
Right.
But
obviously Hendrix comes to mind as one of the artists that made sort of loud, distorted type guitar sounds really.
Yeah, Hendrix
cool.
was a Marshall guy. Hendrix liked his Marshalls, but that's again. I mean, you look at all the big amps of the '80s. It was the Marshall JCMs and the Super Leads. They're big fat tube amps, and but they have the rectifier tubes in them, which will make it start breaking up without having to push the tubes too hard.
Okay,
so
what's a rectifier? What does that?
It's a different kind of tube.
So that's still a tube amp?
It's still a tube amp, but the rectifier is a different kind of tube, which instead of... So if you imagine, say for the sake of argument, you've got 3 tubes, and you have to really drive it to get those tubes to heat up. If you put a rectifier tube in front of it, it'll drive those tubes without you having to put your amp up too loud. So you get... Right,
so you get the nice sort of distorted sound that you want.
But you're not having to... Now, this is the difference between gain and volume.
Yeah, because there's that whole thing as well, right? But gain, I think I understand. So I think I get that gain is the signal coming from the guitar.
The whole. If you imagine with the gain is you're heating the tubes up even further. You're pushing the tubes with the gain. That is to give you the distortion, and then you've got your volume on top of that. But unfortunately, part of gain does make things louder. So it's like the meme: gain and distortion, gain and volume are not the same.
No, they're not the same thing. Because you can, well, certainly on modern amps anyway, you can keep the volume relatively low.
Yeah, of course. I mean,
and
you've
have
got
gain.
My Blackstar HT5. I could just have that cranked down to 1 watt and still get a nice distorted sound out of it. And that was super quiet.
So how does that work then with a solid state amp with transistors? Because obviously you're not then. You don't push it in the same way.
It's all done with microchips and everything. It's a digital version of a tube amp. You know, the way you have the circuit set up is to mimic is to mimic the tubes. Except you're doing it with tiny little transistors now, which is why a lot of, you know, solid state amps don't take up don't have the same footprint as a
and not as heavy, of course.
And not as heavy, no. I think one of the big drawbacks with tube amps has always been for me. I am not a tube amp guy. I've got a few tube amps. I
was going to say, I thought you had some orange tube amps at least.
Yeah, I've got orange and Blackstar tube amps. They would never leave the house though, because number one, they're heavy. Number two, you always you always run the risk of damage to the tubes. I mean, they're basically full of light bulbs.
Yeah, it's actual like glass and stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, obviously they can take a fair bit of bumping and dropping and everything, but it's not ideal.
No.
But for the kind of stuff I play, I prefer a very digital, crunchy sound the majority of the time. That's the thing with amps these days as well, though, especially with like profilers and pedals. I mean, I can plug my Tonex into anything and dial it in and get a sound that I want, irrespective of the amp.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you can do anything now with things like that and with software. I mean, that's me playing at home and not, murdering the neighbours or anything. It's I can plug pretty much into anything, and I mean, with a bit of tweaking, I can get a sound that I like working with. But let's pretend that we don't have any sort of modelers or software or anything like that. So if you were just sort of thinking about different types of amps, what is kind of really the difference in terms of the sound if you're plugging a guitar straight into an amp and playing live? Say like the difference between having a tube amp of any kind and something like the Roland Jazz Chorus, then what would the main characteristic differences be?
The thing with the Jazz Chorus is a very, I don't know, for me the Jazz Chorus has got a very, very, very specific kind of sound to it.
See, this is the thing, right? This is the thing that sort of, I suppose I've never really understood. How does an amp have a sound of its own? Okay,
take I mean, obviously the Police. Okay, that's a very specific guitar sound.
Yes.
That sound comes primarily from a jazz chorus with a deluxe electric Mistress pedal going into it. That's Andy Summers' sound for my ears anyway. Mm-hmm. If you listen to what's that song by Metallica? Nothing Else Matters. Pretty much everybody knows that song. That's a jazz chorus.
Oh, really?
That is, James Hetfield's jazz chorus guy. Wes
never knew.
Borland out of Limp Bizkit, jazz choruses.
See, I would have thought that surprised me because I would have just assumed that, like, because again, I don't know a lot about amps, and I'd have assumed that Metallica were probably using Marshalls.
They use other stuff, and
I'm sure they do, but I would have thought like all the new metal bands used Mesa Boogie.
A lot of the new metal bands used digital Marshalls.
Okay.
Because number one, they're a lot cheaper than the tube amps. Number two, they're very replaceable. You know, you can, at the time, you could basically walk into any music shop and pick up one of these heads, and you're ready to go. But, you know, when you're using like a Marshall, I mean, it's like Angus Young and all these guys. You know, they've got people that just go around looking for vintage amps so that they can get Yngwie Malmsteen, you know, with a whole wall of Marshalls behind them and stuff. And, you know, I don't know how much truth there is in it. People always say, you know, the old stuff is better. But, yeah, for a lot of the crunchy new metal bands and stuff like that, they were just using MG series Marshalls straight out of the shop, because if anything went wrong, they could just go and pick one up and they're good to go. And again, I love that digital crunchy Marshall sound, which is why I've probably got way too many MG heads.
And this is another. Actually, this takes me on to another question, because I know obviously you can get. You know, there are a couple of different ways of approaching amps. You can either have, you know, a head and a cab, or you can have a combo amp. And I don't really understand what are the pros and cons. I mean, to me, it just seems like why don't you just use combo amps? Because that just seems like probably the easiest, cheapest, most practical thing.
Have you ever heard the saying "moving air"? When you're on stage, you're moving air.
Yeah. About the vibration from.
If you're standing in front of a full Marshall stack and you've got that thing cranked, I mean, you can really feel it.
And so you're talking about having a Marshall head and a couple of cabs of speakers.
Yeah, a flat and a wedge, and then a head. Yeah, if you're standing in front of that plate, you really, really, really know about it. Like I said, I like using orange stuff. I always used to use orange stuff when I played live, and even with a half stack, I mean, you can shift some air with that thing. And
so, what do you mean by a half stack? What sort of cab would that be then? Like
just a 4x12 and
4x12
a head,
right?
That's generally considered a half stack is one 4x12. A full stack is two 4x12s.
Right.
These days, because I'm old now, I usually use 2x12s. But that's more than big enough for. I mean,
at home, yeah.
No, I've played like 100 seater venues with a Roland. What's the smallest one I used? I think it was a 30 watt Roland Cube. That was a brilliant amp, amazing amps. Roland Cubes are digital modelers, and for me, like I just used to take like a 15 watt one to rehearsals, and it was more than like I'd never had to have it up beyond 3 or 4 on the thing, and that would compete with the drum kit.
And that's a combo amp, though, isn't it? The Cube?
Yeah. The Roland Cubes are fantastic.
Yeah.
I think they were kind of like the predecessors to the Boss Katanas.
I was going to say, I think that was the forerunner, wasn't it? Of Katana.
I might be. They're probably made in the same damn factory. It's Roland and Boss, isn't it?
Same. Yeah, it's the same thing.
Like I said, I'm not a Katana guy. I've never tried a Katana. I've seen no end of videos about them. I'm sure I would like them because I like Boss stuff. I think it is probably, if you're familiar with the Cube, then I think you would be sort of instantly familiar with. It's literally like having a little pedal board and everything all in one handy little cube
Yeah.
Where I think they got the name from.
Like, in terms of the digital stuff, I mean, I just think Boss are way ahead of pretty much everyone, apart from if you're talking about modelers and things in terms of like the Helix, that's incredible. But just amps wise, you know.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about how much stuff they can get into an amp now, it is mind blowing. I had a Vox Valvetronics amp. I think I had a 50-watt one. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm going back like 15 years or something like that. And that amp was fantastic. It was, honestly, it was great. It was what I was trying to look for from an amp is something that's warm sounding. Right. Like it's got a bit of warmth to it, and it's really hard to put into words. If it's like, yeah, I like this amp because it's warm. But I mean, I love 70s music. I love prog and all that. And I love trying to emulate those sounds. And I find for those sounds, an orange amp can't be beat. Orange amps have got a really special place. And they look so cool as well.
They do look cool. They absolutely do. And they have got that 70s vibe. Like you say, kind of warmth is something that people talk about a lot in terms of... I think as well with amps, though, it's a real personal thing. I mean, I can sit here and say, you know, explain for 2 hours why I think orange amps are the best thing since sliced bread. And then somebody else will be like, no, I like Mesa Boogies, or no, I like Marshalls, or oh no, I'll only play through a Vox AC30. It's a personal thing. And it's each to their own. It depends what you want from an amp. So let's say, I mean, there's pros and cons, obviously, to all of the different types of amps. So, like, what would you say are like some of the things that you could get from tube amps that you can't necessarily get from solid state or modelling amps? Do you think? I know
I'm probably going to get a lot of hate for this.
Down with this sort of thing. Careful now.
Well, you know, people will have different opinions, and that's fine. But I'd like to know what you think.
I don't think there's anything that you can get from a tube amp that you can't get from modelling these days.
No. Not even that, like, that sort of... Everyone always talks about this, but edge of breakup kind of thing.
I know, but what is an amp modeler? It's, you know, it's modeling, you know, it's capturing the sound. I mean, you've seen how they work. They capture the sound of an amp and then replicate it. I don't know. A lot of purists prefer tube amps, and I kind of get why, in the same way that I prefer orange amps. But I just like the sound of an orange amp.
So there must be something about that sound that you don't think you can get out of the Roland Cube amp or something.
Not necessarily. I think it's a lot easier to get the sound that I want with an orange amp than to sit there fiddling about and trying to dial stuff. I mean, obviously, an amp that I've paid £2,000 for is going to sound better than an amp that I paid 80 quid for. It's, you know, it's just the way of the world. But then you've got to take your speakers into consideration. You know what? It's...
Yes, and I do watch. So, you know, Spectre Sound Studios, Glenn Fricker. You know, I'm a big fan of his channel. It's very, very funny, and I just like him, and I like the way he explains things. And he... To
be honest, you should have got Glenn on instead of me. That would have made a much better video.
I'll just ring my mate Glenn.
Well, you've asked everybody else and they've come on.
No, I know that is true. Actually, and thanks everyone for doing that.
If you don't get it, if you don't ask, Joe.
True.
This level of stupid is honestly kind of inspiring. I didn't think it was possible to be this wrong and still operate a keyboard.
He always goes on about the speakers, how your guitar sound, in his opinion, is all about the speaker in your amp?
Yeah, I mean, I was never... Yeah, we were talking about guitar sound. I mean, you can't just say that your guitar sound comes from your speakers or that it comes from your tone wood.
Definitely not tone wood. Definitely not. But speaker seems to be, or Glenn seems to say that is probably the most important thing.
I don't know. If your speakers suck, then yeah, you go. And
all right. So how do I know? So let's say if I was going out tomorrow and I want to buy a new amp, how do I know whether or not the speakers suck?
Celestine's pretty much a good benchmark. I mean, some of them go for like seriously, like some of the vintage ones go for seriously silly money. I saw somebody selling a pair that were out of an old Marshall cab from the 60s. They wanted £500 just for the two speakers. It was crazy. I mean, there's cobwebs and everything on them as well. It just comes down to personal taste. It's like, who are you and what do you like playing?